Deploying Fortigate VM on AWS EC2. One benefit we can get by deploying Fortigate VM on EC2 is we're going to have an active subscription on the device. This way we can download updates for our antivirus, IPS, and we can control web traffic using web filtering. Let's see how easy and simple it is to deploy a Fortigate VM on Amazon EC2. But first, let's take a quick look into our topology to get a better understanding of what we are trying to achieve here today. Here I have a VPC in my account. This VPC is running a CIDR mask /16. Inside the VPC, we have to create two different subnets. A private subnet where we deploy our resources such as VMs, servers, Docker containers, or anything else we are using internally. And the firewall will have two different interfaces, one in the private subnet and one in a public subnet that is restricted only for internet access. Deploying any virtual machines in the public subnet is imposing a security risk to your environment. This way we can use the Fortigate only to control traffic in and out of our private subnet into the internet. So we can still make resources in the private subnet publicly accessible, but we can set up it in a way where the firewall is front-ending this traffic and doing some inspection on it to make sure this traffic is secure before sending it to your private subnet. So let's go into our VPC and do the checklist and see how all this is configured before we head into EC2. So I have here my VPC, it's run the /16. Inside this VPC, I have two different subnets. I have a private subnet with a /24, so this allows me to spawn up to 251 different hosts. I can add more in the future as well. And a public subnet, and you notice I just added a very small CIDR for this, a /28. So this would only allow enough IPs for the firewall interface and maybe any load balancers or anything else we can deploy in the future. So for now, these are my two subnets. Let's check our route table. With the route table, we have two different route tables as well. My private route table. This route table doesn't have anything right now except my local connected network, the whole VPC CIDR mask. And my public route table has the same route, but it also has a default route to the internet. The IGW is my internet gateway, so the firewall with the interface in this subnet can get to the internet, but anything in the private route table has no way to reach the internet directly. This way we achieve our segregation checklist and we can move forward and head into EC2. From here we can choose EC2, and this is where we can deploy virtual machines running any kind of operating system we would like. Let's click Launch Instance, and I want you to search for Fortigate. So the AWS Marketplace, here is where you can find the official images. And here we will have two different options. First option is to use the Fortinet image with a free trial. This is the on-demand instance that you can use to pay as you go without having a license already pre-purchased. The license in here costs you 30 cents an hour for the lowest instance type, but you still get your 2 weeks for free, so make sure you take advantage of this. Once you have decided which instance you need, you can pay for a yearly subscription, which gets you a lot of saving. And above this, you still have to pay for EC2 for the computing process that you use to run the virtual machine, which is not too much. The other option we have is the BYOL, which is bring your own license. If you had already purchased a license from a Fortinet reseller or from the Fortinet website directly, this is what you need to do to use your existing license on the cloud. And this way you only have to pay for EC2 computing process. Once you select Your option is going to show you the kind of instance that you can spawn for this specific AMI or image. It's going to give you an idea about the pricing as a whole. In here, this is the money you are paying for Fortinet, and here, this is the money you are paying for AWS for running your virtual machine. This is the total amount you pay an hour. Not all these instances are the same. They come with different sizes of RAM and CPU, and they are equivalent to the different models of physical devices, as they can handle more traffic and more bandwidth and more VPN throughput the higher you go. So let's see which instance we can deploy for our setup. We can start by a T2 small. This instance is very cheap and is not gonna run you a lot if you run it for a short period of time, and it comes with decent specs for a virtual lab. 1 CPU and 2 gigs of RAM, this is way more than we need. So we can choose the T small and go next. And here it's gonna ask us how many instances of this virtual machine you wanna spawn. We just need one Fortigate for this specific lab, but we can see here there is an option for auto scaling group. This is a very useful feature for companies that have high loads and variable loads at times, and we can dig deep into this in the AWS course. We're gonna choose our only VPC that we created already. For the subnet, it's asking me which subnet do you wanna create your interface in. This part doesn't really matter because we're gonna spawn an interface from each subnet anyway. Just the order you choose here is the order where it's gonna be assigned to the device. If you choose the public subnet in this field, the public port will be the first port in the Fortigate, which is port 1, and then the private subnet we're gonna add in the bottom in here, and just choose another Ethernet port and choose the private subnet. So now my Fortigate will have an arm or a port in the public subnet. It's gonna be port 1, and it's gonna have an arm in the private subnet, which is gonna be port 2. So this matches our topology in here for these two ports. There is no other option that we need in here, so let's just go ahead and review and launch. It's gonna ask us about the key pair. We don't really need a key pair for deploying a Fortigate on AWS, as it will give us the default password right away. So let's just proceed without a key pair, acknowledge, and just launch. This instance will take a minute to launch, and then we will be back. And we are back, and my instance is in running state right now. We can see we have two different private IPs for the two different interfaces we created. The one with the 10.10.10.5, this is my public interface, and 10.10.20.151 is my private interface. For the time being, I have no public IPs because once you create multiple interfaces in an instance, you cannot initially assign a public IP to it. So we have to go in and get a public IP and assign it to my interface. So let's go to network interfaces quickly, and I want you to mark which interface responds to the public IP. So for this one, we said that 10.10.10.5, this is my public NIC. I just want to give it a name. This will help me assign the public IP to it with an alias. So I just give it a name for each interface. This way it's easy to mark. Now let's go back to elastic IPs. This is where you can get public IPs such as this one. So I can just choose this public IP and click Action, Associate, and I'm going to choose a network interface. And from here, we see why the alias help us choose easily, because without the alias that we just added, we will be just seeing the serial number for the interface, which doesn't really help. So I want to assign my public IP to my public interface, which is port 1 on the Fortigate, and associate. This way, this IP right now is my gateway to enter to the firewall. So first, let's try to put this into the browser and see if we can get access to the device. And now I'm getting a prompt to log into my Fortigate. The initial password is going to be my instance ID, so you can just go back to instance, and this instance ID, you can just click the copy button. This will be your password for login to the Fortigate. Just put admin, put the password in here, and it's going to ask you right away to change your password. To just choose a different one. It's going to ask you to log in again because now you secured your Fortigate from the initial password. Nobody can get to it. And now we have full access to the Fortigate on the cloud. And I want to show you that I have a license right now to use this instance, so I can get general updates, I can get firmware updates, I can get IPS updates, everything that is not available on the GNS3 or VMware Workstation version. And the last step we need to do is we need to modify our route table on the private subnet now that we have deployed the AWS Fortigate instance. So I want you to go back to your VPC and head into your route tables. As you remember, in the public route table we had a default route to the internet gateway, but we mentioned that in the private route table we are dead. We have no way to access the internet directly. So the way we can make the traffic route to the internet through the firewall, we have to create a special kind of default route. So I want you to watch how you can do this easily from here by choosing a default route and sending this traffic to the network interface of the private subnet. And again, we see here the importance of the aliases because it helps us choose easily without having to figure out these serial number interface names. So everything in the private subnet will send the traffic to the Fortigate on its private NIC. And this way, the Fortigate will be the middleman between all my private instance and all the internet traffic. And now, anytime you spawn any instance in the private route table, it will be configured routing wise, and you only need to create the associated firewall policy to allow this access to the internet. Thank you for watching.